Caleb Jenkins had never stepped foot inside a university lecture hall until that rainy Saturday. His mother, Clara, squeezed his hand as they hurried across Harvard Yard, dodging puddles under her battered umbrella. She'd saved up for weeks to bring him here, just a free public seminar for promising young math students, the flyer had said. She'd figured her boy deserved to see a place where big ideas lived, even if they could barely afford his shoes, let alone tuition. Inside the ancient stone building, the hall smelled like chalk dust and old wood polish. Marble floors gave way to creaking seats, arranged in perfect rows, that curved down toward a massive blackboard. Caleb's eyes widened at the ornate moldings and tall, arched windows. He clutched his spiral notebook like a lifeline. At the front, Professor Weldon paced with theatrical energy. His tweed blazer hugged his thin shoulders as he scribbled symbols and numbers at lightning speed. Around Caleb sat kids at least 5 years older, sharp in pressed shirts, shiny shoes tapping the floor. Some parents whispered about private tutors and test scores. Clara tried not to shrink into her thrift store coat. Professor Weldon cleared his throat dramatically. "What I'm about to write on this board," he said, striking the chalk like a conductor, "has been called impossible. Unsolved by the brightest postgraduates for decades. You may try, you will fail, but failure teaches discipline." He stepped aside, revealing an equation so dense it looked like a foreign language. Caleb tilted his head. The lines of symbols reminded him of late nights at the kitchen table, drawing puzzle grids on the backs of old bills while his mom dozed beside him. Kids in the front row squinted. A boy with shiny hair and a Harvard sweatshirt half raised his hand, then dropped it. Nervous laughter trickled through the seats. Weldon chuckled under his breath, turning to scribble notes on his clipboard. Caleb's pencil tapped the page. Something felt familiar. His mother leaned over, whispering, "Honey, just watch. Don't embarrass yourself, okay?" She squeezed his knee, but Caleb's mind was buzzing. He didn't see the fancy clothes or hear the scattered snickers. He saw the gap, a tiny missing link, buried in the swirl of letters and signs. He raised his hand before he knew he'd done it. The professor turned slowly. His eyebrows shot up. "Yes, little man in the back?" He shaded his eyes to see. A ripple of soft laughter rolled through the room. Caleb's mother tugged his sleeve. "Caleb, sit down." He was already standing. His notebook hugged to his chest. He stepped into the aisle, heart thumping. He felt the weight of every stare. Parents, students, the professor's cold smile. The marble floor was too bright, the wood desk too tall. But the chalk in Weldon's hand was only chalk, the same as the piece he used at home on the fridge door. "Come on down then," Weldon said, voice dripping with amused condescension. "Show us your grand insight, young man." The lecture hall hushed so quickly, Caleb could hear his own shoes squeak on the steps as he descended. He swallowed, took the chalk from the professor's fingers, and faced the massive blackboard that had crushed the pride of students twice his age. Caleb could feel the chalk dust sticking to his fingertips as he faced the sea of eyes fixed on his small back. For a second, he wished he were anywhere else, back home at the kitchen table with his mother, humming old tunes while he scribbled numbers onto junk mail envelopes. But here he was, standing in front of a Harvard professor who was already half smirking, waiting for him to embarrass himself. He took a breath, steadying his heartbeat the way he'd learned to when the world felt too big. He scanned the maze of numbers and symbols again, tracing the lines with his eyes the way his mother traced sewing patterns late at night. His pencil back home was stubby, but this chalk was fresh and clean. He started with a tiny mark near the corner, so small that a few parents chuckled, thinking he was doodling. But then, with a surprising steadiness, his small hand moved. He shifted a bracket here, flipped a fraction there. His feet barely touched the ground as he rose on his toes to reach a line of exponents that curved high above his head. The entire hall had gone pin-drop silent. Even Professor Weldon's pen froze mid-scratch on his clipboard. A student up front nudged her friend, eyes wide. Clara stood in the aisle now, one hand pressed over her mouth as she mouthed silent prayers she hadn't uttered in years. Caleb stepped back for a second, tapping the chalk against his thigh like he did with pencils at home. His lips moved soundlessly, double-checking the numbers that had always danced so easily for him when nobody else was looking. He wiped sweat from his nose with the back of his hand, leaving a faint white streak. Then he turned back to the board and finished it. 3 more lines, a final neat underline, and then he circled it, just like he did when he solved puzzles alone. He turned around. For a moment nobody breathed. Weldon leaned forward, eyes darting over the board, his lips moving as he checked every piece of the impossible problem. The professor's eyebrows twitched up, then down, then shot up again as the truth settled in. The young students leaned in, necks craned, disbelief in their wide eyes. Clara felt her knees wobble as she stared at her son, her boy who always saw patterns in places she couldn't. Her tired hands clutched her cheap purse to her chest like it was priceless. Finally, Professor Weldon lowered his clipboard. His smirk was gone. "How? What's your name?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "Caleb Jenkins," the boy said, voice trembling but clear. The students burst into a wave of astonished whispers. A few clapped without meaning to. Weldon nodded stiffly, then did something nobody in the room expected. He stepped aside and clapped once, twice, until the whole hall was filled with the sound of reluctant applause. Clara's eyes shone with tears. Caleb looked up at her and smiled, small and shy, still gripping the chalk that had silenced Harvard for the first time that day.